Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami, and this is episode 87. In today's episode, I want to explore with you a little bit the question, what if it isn't fibromyalgia? This is a topic that has come up so often over the last few months as part of my Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor training program. All of the women in that class, at some point or another, we had the conversation, what if this isn't fibromyalgia? Now, what do I mean by that? I think that's a really important place to start because I know you might be thinking that I am saying you don't have fibromyalgia, and that's not what I mean by that question at all. What I mean is, what if the fatigue, the brain fog, the pain, the poor sleep, what if those symptoms are being contributed to by something else? Either in addition to fibromyalgia or instead of fibromyalgia. It's really, really important that we treat the conditions that we have. I always use sleep as a great example. If you are having trouble sleeping because you have something like sleep apnea, our treatment for that is going to be much, much different than if you're having trouble sleeping because your cortisol levels are high, or if you're having trouble sleeping because your pain levels are high and you're in an uncomfortable bed, or at least uncomfortable for your body, or if you're not sleeping because you're stressed out and anxious. We would treat all of those things different. So it's really, really important that we don't use fibromyalgia as a blanket statement of a box, so to speak. Yes, fibromyalgia is absolutely a real thing. And yes, absolutely, there are things that we need to do to specifically treat your fibromyalgia. But we also need to treat the other things too. Fibromyalgia, you've heard me say it often, fibromyalgia is an amplifier. It's going to take your fatigue, your pain, your brain fog, and it's going to amplify that to an even greater extent. So for instance, if you have a shoulder injury, everything's going to hurt a lot more with fibromyalgia added to that. Same thing, right? If you have fibromyalgia and you add a shoulder injury, that's going to jack all your pain up. So it's important that we treat all those other little things. Now, this is going to sound really obvious, but your body is made up of a bunch of parts, right? You've got various organs. You've got your central nervous system. You've got your endocrine system, your hormones. There are so many things going on. It's why we have all these specialists, right? We have neurologists, we have pulmonologists, we have rheumatologists, we have the gastroenterologist. We have all these different people who specialize in all the different pieces of your body. One of the things that I realized early on in my fibromyalgia journey was that if I made all of those pieces work as well as possible, then the overall picture would be better, right? If my thyroid's working, my adrenals, if my nervous system is calm and responding as it should, if I've taken care of nutritional deficiencies, hormone imbalances, all of those things, then by default, my body is going to be healthier. It's not necessarily going to fix everything, but of course it's going to be better than if I don't. So thinking along those same lines, we want to think about, what if it isn't fibromyalgia? What if the thing you're experiencing, the symptom you're experiencing, shouldn't be blamed solely on fibromyalgia? It seems as though our doctors do one of two things. On one extreme, they don't believe in fibromyalgia at all. And you guys know how I feel about that. That's like not believing in diabetes or heart disease. Fibromyalgia is real. On the other end, we have people who blame everything on fibromyalgia. I have had so many clients who have had real physical reasons for why they hurt, torn ligaments, all kinds of things. And yet their pain was being blamed solely on fibromyalgia, and therefore it wasn't being treated or taken care of. The problem with this is, of course, there are things that can be treated. If you've got a torn ligament, we need to be aware of that, right? If you break a bone, we need to make sure we give it space to heal. If your thyroid isn't working right, we need to give you hormones or do what we need to do to get it functioning right again, right? So it's important to ask this question: what if what you're experiencing isn't fibromyalgia? Now, there are so many things that overlap with fibromyalgia, and I just want to talk a little bit about some of the most common ones to give you a little bit of a place to start. You have heard me mention more than once in this episode about thyroid and adrenals. These are probably the two big things that every single person with fibromyalgia should check out. Unfortunately, not all doctors know how to check these properly. We have 2 whole classes on thyroid and adrenals as part of the Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor training. And in the class on thyroid, I have you look at your own thyroid labs. Of course, I'm not a doctor. We're not making diagnoses here. But what we are doing is, as a patient, learning how to read the reports that we get, learning what the various labs even mean so we can have an intelligent conversation about it. A few things that happen. Number one, most people realize that their doctor hasn't actually been running all the tests. They've just been running one test instead of the whole panel. And that one test does not show everything. That's, of course, a topic for a whole nother podcast episode. But if your doctor is just running one test for your thyroid, it's not going to show you everything you need to know to properly diagnose or treat your thyroid. With your adrenals, a lot of doctors out there are Western trained physicians, are MDs. Some of them don't even think that adrenal fatigue is a real thing. So we've got that challenge, right? And not all of them even know what to do about that. But your adrenals need to be functioning at the right level and at the right time. If you are producing too much cortisol at the wrong time, like at night, you're not going to be able to sleep. If you're not producing enough, like in the morning, which was my situation, then you're not going to be able to wake up. So we need the right things at the right time in the right amounts. It's kind of like we're Goldilocks, right? Where this one's too hard, this one's too soft, this one's just right. So with fibromyalgia, yes, we are Goldilocks. We are also, if you haven't figured it out, we're the Princess and the Pea, right? We could feel that pea under all of those mattresses, but I digress. So yes, we need to be looking at your actual numbers. We need to be looking at your symptoms. We need to be considering, is this more than just fibromyalgia? If you are someone who feels like you have tried everything you know how to try, if you've tried all the medications, if your doctor has prescribed you Lyrica and Cymbalta and Savella and amitriptyline, and you've used tramadol and you've used other pain medication and you've done all these things, and you've had massage and acupuncture and all this stuff, and it doesn't seem like it's helping you, there is a really good chance you've got a lot more going on than just fibromyalgia, because these things typically do help. Doesn't make it all better by no means, but it does typically, something in there will help you. But if you're doing all of the things that typically help fibromyalgia and it doesn't help you, then it's a reasonable deduction that maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there is some kind of autoimmune or some other kind of condition. One of the things that has come up in my most recent class is mast cell activation syndrome, which is a whole podcast episode on its own. I promise I'm working on that. But if you're one of those people who always responds with side effects to medications, or you have to take the smallest dose of a medication, or you react to certain foods, or you have a lot of allergies, these are all things that for me as a coach, not as a doctor, but for me as a coach, I feel like might point to there being some kind of an overactive histamine response, a mast cell issue. Another condition to consider is if you've got undiagnosed sleeping issues like sleep apnea. We have one person in our class who mentioned on her homework she did not get a good night's sleep until she finally got her CPAP machine. Now, that may not sound like something that you want to do. Maybe you're feeling a little ostrichy and head in the sand about, I don't want to get a sleep study done because I might need a CPAP machine. Don't worry about that. I promise you, it is a whole lot better getting a good night's sleep and being able to function during the day than to deal with some inconvenience or even uncomfortableness or getting used to having bad sleep for a short amount of time so that you eventually have good sleep later. It's worth getting used to that. I would not even take a nap without my CPAP machine. So why am I talking about this one? Well, about 40 to 50% of the people who have fibromyalgia have sleep apnea. It is so much higher than the normal population. It's almost a 50-50 chance. Flip a coin. Do you have sleep apnea or not if you have fibromyalgia? So it's really important to have a sleep study and have this checked out. A lot of doctors out there aren't going to think about this because in the normal population, it's less than 10%. So it's not very likely that you might have sleep apnea. But with fibromyalgia, it's very, very likely that you have some kind of undiagnosed sleep issue. So try a sleep study. Some of the other conditions that I see often, of course, chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of people debate whether chronic fatigue syndrome is the same thing as fibromyalgia or not. Some experts think it's just different variations of the same illness. Other people think that they're two separate illnesses. In looking at the research that's been done, comparing the two, I personally believe that they are separate. Of course, there's so much that we don't know about either one of them that I could easily be wrong. But one of the bits of research that I've seen actually shows some differences in the mitochondria between someone with fibromyalgia and someone who's been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And because of studies like that, where they actually show some differences, is why I think it's something else. I have also had several clients who have been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and the ones that I believe have chronic fatigue syndrome, or more often now being called ME, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, which I'm not going to spell for you, but you can find it in the show notes of today's episode. They have found some really interesting things about that. And my clients who I feel truly have that, their fatigue is on a whole nother level. So if you can imagine, a regular person saying they're tired and your fatigue as somebody with fibromyalgia, maybe somebody with regular fatigue, let's give them a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. Fibromyalgia might be like a 5, but ME/CFS might be like a 10, right? So the difference between us with fibromyalgia and someone who's just, regular tired that big of a gap is probably the same between fibromyalgia and ME/CFS. So it is important to look at that. ME/CFS tends to have some viral components. There's viruses involved. And speaking of viruses, things like that, of course, there are chronic infections, right? Like Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr virus, even long COVID now, right? There are a lot of chronic infections that might just be low-grade infections where our regular form of testing, right? Like if you test for a current Lyme infection, for instance, that's a very different test than testing for chronic Lyme or testing for a current Epstein-Barr infection versus a recurring chronic one. Sometimes those chronic things aren't tested in the same way, and so they get missed. So it's important we take a look at that. So again, I ask the question, what if it isn't fibromyalgia? What if your pain is caused from torn ligaments in your hip? What if your pain is caused from some autoimmune thing? In our last episode, Julie talked about having Julie disease or a random autoimmune that doesn't have any name. What if it's mast cell activation? What if it's mold exposure? What if it's multiple chemical and environmental sensitivities? It could be so many different things, and how we approach those is all different. And it's different than how we treat fibromyalgia. So we've got both directions to look at here, right? We need to not assume that everything is fibromyalgia. We need to dig a little bit deeper and make sure that all of the pieces of your body are working as well as possible. On the other end, we can't assume that it's not fibromyalgia. We have to be doing those things that are going to help you treat your fibromyalgia, bring your nervous system back under control so you're not amplifying everything, and calm down that inner Goldilocks princess in the pea. Now, how do you go about figuring this out, especially if you have a doctor, like most of them, who hasn't really even been trained in fibromyalgia and they don't maybe know how to check for some of these things? Sometimes it requires you seeing a specialist, but most of the time, what it actually requires is you advocating for yourself. It's you being in your body and going to your providers and saying, hey, there is more to this. I feel it. There is more to this. I feel that we haven't answered all of the questions. I feel that this treatment isn't working as well as I wish that it would. Do your own research on fibromyalgia, on the other conditions. Look at things about thyroid for sure, things about adrenal, absolutely, for sure. Whenever I have somebody who doesn't have an issue with one of those two things, it's always surprising because it's almost everybody. Same thing with your sleep. Make sure you're checking into how you can have a sleep study done and checking for sleep apnea. Those are some things that you can do on your own. Advocating for yourself, learning everything you can. If even that feels a little bit overwhelming, then you may want to consider taking a class or hiring a coach. Yes, I know that's what I do, but it's true that having somebody alongside you to be able to practice that conversation. How are you going to have that conversation with your doctor? How are you going to ask them for various tests? What are the important things? Where do you even start? It can be really helpful to have a guide with that, someone who knows more than you do, who maybe has helped other people with this. It can be really helpful to have that person alongside you to empower you to have those important conversations. And with the class that's graduating this week on July 23rd, you'll hear that in their stories that working with their coach really empowered them to have these important conversations with their doctors, which then led to them getting the treatments that they really needed. In terms of learning all you can, you know that the best way I know for you to feel better is our Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor class. In that class, I teach you everything I possibly can about fibromyalgia in 9 weeks. We talk about thyroid, adrenals, sleep, pain. We talk about exercise and nutrition, brain fog, managing your energy, self-care, complementary and integrative medicine. We talk about it all. Of course, it's just the foundational level. There's so much more even beyond that, but it gives you a place to start and it exposes you to all the other things that might be going on. You'll hear in our graduation on Saturday that learning these other possibilities was a huge help for the people in the class and finally figuring out, oh, hey, that wasn't actually fibromyalgia. That was something else that now I can treat and take care of. And that's really the point of it all, right? Is that if you don't know, you can't treat it. But if you do know, if you find it, then you can treat it. And many, many of these other conditions are very, very treatable. Fibromyalgia is harder to treat, but things like your thyroid really isn't that hard to treat. Treating sleep apnea really isn't that hard. It might take a little bit of perseverance on your part and a little bit of getting used to sleeping with a mask on your face, but the actual treating of it isn't hard at all. It's totally fixable. So if we're blaming things on fibromyalgia that are fixable and we're not fixing them, then of course you're not going to feel as good as you could. Of course not. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for today. I do have our listener shout out, so hang on for that. But just to kind of sum it up, I want you to be thinking, what if this isn't fibromyalgia? Don't blame everything on your fibromyalgia. Do not blame all of your pain, all of your fatigue, your sleep issues, your brain fog. Don't blame it all on fibromyalgia. Those things can be caused by so many other things that we really need to dig deeper. And I promise you, even if you've got a great doctor, they can't check everything all the time with everyone. They're going to make their best guesses, right? Because we're also playing the insurance, health care game and your own pocketbook, right? Like you can't necessarily afford every test under the sun. So we pick and choose and we pick the most obvious culprits, but maybe we need to dig deeper and not just leave it at that. And also, don't not blame things on fibromyalgia. We also have to be looking at how we can treat fibromyalgia as well. Now, I mentioned that our current class is graduating on Saturday, July 23rd. If you love hearing tips from real people with fibromyalgia, if you would like to hear their stories about exploring this question, what if it isn't fibromyalgia, and hear about how they have found ways to feel better, you are welcome to join us. You can go to ifcigraduation.com or just go to today's show notes, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/87, and we'll have a link there where you can register for graduation. If you're listening to this after July 23rd, go to those same links and you'll be able to still get the information. We usually offer replays and things like that for people who are interested. Now, I also want you to really think about coming from the standpoint of giving you a little bit of hope and encouragement. It can be so isolating to have fibromyalgia. It can feel like you are the only one going through this. Even your doctors might not know what to do with you. Maybe even they've told you that, right? Come hear from other people who have walked the same path that you have and who have found ways to feel better, just chipping away at things bit by bit, trying different things to see what helps. The class that's graduating, they have been able to improve their fibromyalgia impact questionnaire score from, 47% to 74%, I think. So what would it be like if your fibromyalgia was reduced by 50 to 75%. And that's massive. That's huge. Our meds don't do that. They're like 17%. So please come. Please be encouraged. Please get some hope. And again, you can get that link at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/87. And so I'm going to end today's episode with an email that we got from Liz, who is a listener in the UK. And she says, I am new to the world of podcasts, and I am so thankful that your podcast exists. It has not only helped me, but my partner too. I am full of questions, but I'm anticipating a lot of these will be addressed through the podcasts, and I look forward to exploring them further. When I was diagnosed, I was hit hard, thinking that my future would look nothing like what I had envisioned. I am now allowing the hope to return, that I can still have the core elements of the future I wanted pre-diagnosis, but it's just going to look a little bit different. I'm my own worst enemy. I have been since my teenage years, and I turned over a new leaf after listening to Your Body Isn't the Enemy episode 2, by the way. And she says, I even wrote a poem which involved forgiving my body, apologizing to my body, and agreeing to work together as one going forward. I am by no means a poet, but I love to be creative any way I can. And then she concludes her email with this. Here's to hope and freedom, and loving ourselves for the amazing things we're capable of, instead of punishing ourselves for the things we feel we should have done. Thank you so much for all you are doing for the present and future of those with fibromyalgia. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you for letting me share your email. There's so much juicy stuff in there. I love so many of the things that you said. Thinking about the fact that you can have those core elements of the future that you wanted, but it just might look a little bit different. I love that you wrote a poem forgiving your body, apologizing to your body, and agreeing to work together. That is something really everyone listening should think about, whether you write a poem or you just sit with yourself for a minute. You and your body are on the same side, right? You guys are supposed to be working together. So do think about the fact that your body is not the enemy. Maybe go listen to that episode. We'll have the link in our show notes. And think about how you can reconcile with your body. And yes, here's to hope and freedom, and loving ourselves for the amazing things we're capable of, instead of punishing ourselves for the things we feel we should have done. See you here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stacklehouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.